Mr. Dillon, we meet again. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, John.
All right, so this, for the audience, this is part 2 of a conversation that will be linked below, and it will not be the last time in this episode that I'll also mention that Dillon's website will be down below and appropriate citations as they come up in our talk together. But I especially invite the audience to check out the first part of this conversation, and that will give you the background of where we're going.
It was a blast.
Yes, I really enjoyed it.
Fun with that, yeah.
For my part, I never knew that Carol Quigley had this whole historical scaffolding to the other books that we tend to get into, in the pop discourse with Tragedy, Hope, Anglo-American Establishment. And I really took that away, Dillon, from our time last week, that little key.
Yeah. Well, and then, I mean, with, like I mentioned last week, it's tragedy. If you don't read Evolution of Civilizations and you read Tragedy and Hope is still a great read. But once you read Evolution of Civilizations, you see that what he describes in Evolution of Civilizations is what he's doing in Tragedy and Hope. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think that's one of the reason why Tragedy and Hope is so riveting is because he's viewing it through this analysis method that he developed.
Yeah, and so for the audience, this kind of gets into the topic of historiography and that way that history is written and interpreted as opposed to the events themselves. And I can't wait to get into that text myself. Might pay a visit to the bookstore. Of course, the last time I went to a bookstore, I went out of my way to get in the car, dressed up, and all this jazz. The last time I went to a bookstore and I asked them for the book, oh, we don't have it. Why don't you just buy it on Amazon?
Yeah.
I'm trying to help you people out.
Good point. Why don't I just buy it on Amazon? That's right. I was thinking the same thing. You say you're going to drive to the bookstore. I don't know if you're going to find Carol Quigley at a local bookstore these days.
Yeah, golly. But actually, I think the Barnes & Noble in Danbury was commandeered as an Amazon warehouse, if I'm not mistaken, which is a perfect a sign of the times. Yep. But anyhow, here we are again, and I think it's really interesting the attention you give, Dillon, to intellectual self-defense. And so maybe a good stepping off point would be to define that, and we'll go from there. Why it's important, what are some of the strategies, and so forth.
Sure. And then intellectual self-defense is not a term I coined. It's actually something I got from Richard Andrew Grove. Right now, his current project is called Grand Theft World, but back in the day, he used to make a podcast called Peace Revolution Podcast. I don't know if he stole it from somebody else, but that's the first time I heard the term intellectual self-defense.
The Connecticut man, if I'm not mistaken, by the way.
That's right. That's right. He is a Connecticut guy. So when I talk about intellectual self-defense, I think I've come up with a roadmap that nobody else has come up with. Because typically when you talk about intellectual self-defense, you dive right into formal logic, learning fallacies, understanding syllogisms, being able to create an argument, identify what is and what isn't an argument, and all that stuff's great. I'm not criticizing that in the least slightest little bit. What I believe I've added to this is, and I'll break this down more conclusively. I just want to open this up. Why what I'm saying is different from any other person that you're going to be fighting on intellectual self-defense, right? Is, okay, you've learned all these fallacies, you've taken all these logic courses, and you've got like this iron mind for identifying arguments and not arguments and making arguments. So what? So if you're in an argument with somebody, or if you're having a discussion with somebody, the person commits a fallacy and you call out the fallacy. If that person is manipulative and is intending to be manipulative, why does he care that you call them out? Right? It's like, hey, you committed such and such a fallacy. Oh yeah, I know. That's what I'm doing, and I'm going to keep doing it. Right? And what I realized, and I if we got time, I can go through the story of how I came to this realization, is that I'm going to use the term circuit here, and I think you'll figure out what I mean. We have more than two circuits for communication, but I'm going to focus on two at the moment. Okay. We have a rational circuit, which is presumably what you and I are engaged in right now, where we can create arguments, we could use semantics, create words, utilize ideas, compare ideas, contrast ideas, where we can go back and forth, and through this, we can come up with a win-win interaction. Which is to say, okay, here's what you want, here's what I want, here's the situation, here's the disagreement. How do we, talk about this so we can walk away with something that we both like? Or at least we both don't hate each other over, right? That's a far cry from what's called the emotional circuit, which is all about identifying and acting in accordance with hierarchy. Mm-hmm. So this is all about either you do as I say because I'm in charge, or I do as you say because you're in charge. One submits, one dominates. And so these are win-lose interactions. And I think a good way to visualize this is something like a dog pack, where or a wolf pack. There's an alpha dog or an alpha wolf, and there aren't any discussions, there aren't any committees, there's no arguments, there's no data to put forward or whatever. It's just the alpha dog tells the other dogs what to do, and that's the end of the story, unless another dog can dominate the alpha dog and therefore become the alpha dog. Mm-hmm. We have this capacity too, using the term circuit. Now, here's what I don't think me saying that is anything new to anybody, even if the person listening has never articulated it like that. It's kind of self-evident. Mm-hmm. Here's the kicker. Here's the thing I really realized. If there's somebody on the emotional circuit interacts with somebody attempting to be on the rational circuit, and these two collide, the rational circuit simply evaporates. It's completely yes. It's completely useless. It does absolutely nothing. So if I come to you and I'm trying to have a win-win interaction, let's discuss. And you're coming to me with, I want to have a win-lose interaction. I'm going to yell. Mm-hmm. I'm going to insult. I'm going to manipulate. Well, what kind of interaction are we having? Are we having a win-win interaction or a win-lose interaction?
Yeah, the second.
Right? And it doesn't matter how hard I try to make it a win-win interaction. I mean, I guess there is the possibility if, hey, I can convince you to calm down, and I convince you to say, hey, you're kind of being emotional, and maybe we should have a win-win interaction. Okay, yeah, fine. Yeah, that is a possibility. But if you're not interested in that, no amount of rational discourse is going to change the interaction which is going on, which is win-lose. So if I'm trying to have win-win and you're trying to have win-lose, who's the loser here?
Yeah,
I'm losing by default because there's a fight happening and I'm not even showing up to the fight. Mm-hmm. So my opinion is that intellectual self-defense has two components, and most people talking about intellectual self-defense only focus on the first component. The first component is identification. All the logic courses and fallacies and formal syllogism, all that sort of stuff is all about identifying. Well, it's also about making your own arguments, right? But in terms of keeping it on the intellectual self-defense conversation, it's all about identifying where something went wrong. And where something went wrong is called a fallacy. Mm-hmm. Now, what do you do once you've identified that we're not having a rational conversation?
Yeah. Well, you disengage unless you're married to the person, or
I mean, but before we get into like detailed situations, right? Yeah. Is if we understand that remaining rational does nothing. Mm-hmm. Actually, it does worse than nothing, because you're not defending yourself. Right? Mm-hmm. If you're punching me in the face and I don't even pick up my hands and defend myself, that's worse than nothing. I'm just getting lambasted. So my first thing, before we get into whatever strategy, because there's an infinite number of strategies that you can take, and like you said, it depends. Who am I talking to? What's my relationship to them? What's going on? That's all a point. The one thing you don't do is to continue being reasonable. I will say that with one caveat. If someone's pointing a gun to your head and engaging in win-lose argumentation, and they're going to shoot you if you don't pretend to be reasonable, okay, yeah, continue being reasonable, right? Okay, there is a situation when that happens. But in our current modern day, when, for the most part, a disagreement typically isn't going to descend into physical violence. the only reason to be reasonable is honestly you don't understand what's going on. You're scared, or you're scared of confrontation.
Mm.
So, when I talk about intellectual self-defense, my opinion is that the whole identification phase should be fast. You want that as fast as possible so you can get to phase 2, which is what do I do about it?
Mm.
Do I engage? Do I run away? Do I continue pretending to be reasonable? I mean, the phase 2 is actually a much bigger conversation than phase 1. And phase 1 is actually pretty formulaic. Phase 2 is kind of like, how do you teach somebody a martial art with a book or a video? You don't. It's not possible, right? I mean, I can give you some ideas, but you have to.
You got to get hands on.
Yeah, you got to hands on and train yourself. So, I want just to give an idea of where I came from with this. So,
yes,
when I was a kid, I had a pretty miserable childhood, if I could just say it bluntly. My parents divorced when I was 4. My dad was thrown to the winds, and my mother was just awful. And I wasn't until I must have been like 30 or something. I accidentally stumbled across this article online about narcissistic parents. And my jaw hit the floor while I was reading this because it was so descriptive of what I experienced. I thought like there must have been cameras in my house of people watching me growing up and just like, okay, this is exactly the thing that's happening to Dylan. Like I didn't realize that it's such a pervasive thing that you could write an article about it, and the pathology is so predictable. Like you think the article is about you. And I then further realized that this really applied to my whole family, particularly on that side. And I then further realized that everybody's doing this to each other all the time. Now, I think my family was like an order of magnitude above normal. But I went travel. I mentioned this in the previous video. At some point in my life, I went traveling. I live in Washington State. I moved to Vermont, near Connecticut. I was there for a year. Then I moved to Austria, and I lived around Europe, mainly in Austria, for a little over 2 years. And during that time, which is interesting, we're having this conversation, is when I really started studying this stuff. I was really into. I mean, Peace Revolution podcast was my main go-to, but from there, he has all the sources where he's linking everything from. I could go jump to all these other sources. That's why I really started. Okay, fallacies and formal logic and intellectual self-defense. So I was really thinking about these things. And I remember when I came back, and I didn't visit home once the entire time that I was gone. I remember when I came back, I had this naive idea. I've been gone and on all these adventures, and I've had all these experiences, and I've grown so much, and I've learned so many things. Everybody else must have done the same thing. No, that's not how it works. So I get back, and now I'm not going to say everybody, but it felt like everybody. Everybody tried to put me back into the box they remember me coming out of. And I started noticing the way they would talk to me. This is mostly family, but some friends too. Yeah. The way they would talk to me, like it was so obvious it was manipulative to me at this point. Where there was a couple times I remember just sitting in awe or standing, whatever I was doing, just experiencing what they were saying in awe, thinking, how are you not ashamed of yourself for what's coming out of your mouth? It's so obviously manipulative. I was just shocked. But now what was interesting in this time, I had no interest in putting up with it. Because while I was in Europe, I won't tell the whole story. I've told it a million times and every other time I've ever talked about this. But essentially, I was in a situation where someone approached me and wanted to have a conversation with me because I had some sort of politically charged shirt. I had a shirt that said fluoride kills on it, right?
That'll do.
And I made it in my basement in Vermont. But I'd still wear it if the thing didn't fall into shreds. But he approaches me about this. Now, I've got a degree in chemistry. I've read the book, The Fluoride Deception. I'm not this total idiot when I'm talking about this thing. And in Europe, it's kind of an empty political statement because they don't fluoridate their water for the most part.
Right.
I was just a broke vagabond. It was the only shirt that I had to wear. So this guy approaches me. He wants to talk to me about my shirt. And when I attempted to engage in the conversation, he kept shutting me down within like 2 or 3 sentences. Just like laughing at me while he's doing it. No, that can't be true. I heard somebody say that before and he was an idiot, so that can't be true. Now, I know, like, instantaneously, I would jump on that now. But at the time, I was kind of like, what? So I started again, and he shut me down again. And I started again, and he shut me down again. And at some point, I kept thinking, I'm like, what is going on here? What? I feel like I'm losing. I feel like I'm losing. What am I losing? Is there a game that I'm losing at, right? And I was losing. What I did, I bet if somebody was filming me, and we went back and watched the video, you would probably see the light bulb that went off above my head. And everything I just said about the 2 circuits colliding with each other hit me. And I realized this guy did not come over to talk to me. He came over to make fun of me. Mm-hmm. And in particular, I left out this detail. I had my friends at this location. So we were at this restaurant. He comes over to sit. He's doing this to me in front of my friends. Yeah. This guy came to humiliate me, and in particular, humiliate me in front of other people. And when that happened, I looked straight at him, and I just dropped the entire pretense of conversation. I said, if you don't change your tone of voice, I'm not telling you anything. Mm-hmm. And you want to talk about some immediate tension at the table? Like pin drop tension, right? And he went through these phases of like, first, oh, no, man, I just came over to have a conversation. I just want to ask about fluoride. I said, if you don't change your tone of voice, I'm not telling you anything. Oh, you're taking this too personally. If you don't change your tone of voice, I'm not telling you anything. Oh, no. Then he flipped it like I'm picking on him, like I'm some bully or something. And at some point, I raised my voice. I said, if you don't change your tone of voice, I'm not telling you anything. Now, I didn't talk about body posture yet. Okay. But when it comes to submission and domination, there's actually body posture associated with that. I mean, and it's not that hard to figure out. How does an alpha person walk around?
Hands out.
Straight up, and I'm going to get in your face. How does a servant or a slave walk around?
Shuffling, hands in the pocket.
Shuffling, spine slunched over. So the whole time he was making fun of me, he's sitting in this chair. I remember he had this just obnoxious grin on his face. He was doing this, just laughing the whole time. Yeah, great posture, sitting up. And after it was like 3, 4, 5 times I repeated, if you don't change your tone of voice, I'm telling you anything. After I raised my voice that last time, the grin melted, and he slumped over. Mm-hmm. And he was done. It wasn't that long before he excused himself and he went to the other table. And this was an event that was all weekend. The rest of the weekend, when we bumped into each other, he had nothing but respect to talk to me with. Mm-hmm. Now, there was a second thing that happened. After he leaves, you know what all my friends at the table did?
Criticized you.
They leaned in, they said, Dylan, that was really rude. What did you do that for? Now, honestly, I don't remember what I said to them at the time. I do know what I would say now, which is all you guys missed it. You didn't understand. He started the fight. Mm-hmm. So this, I think, is really the key component to manipulation, is there's a massive amount of peer pressure involved with it. Where because people don't understand this nuance between what I'm calling the emotional circuit and the rational circuit, what a sophist does, and I don't want to say I'm hesitant to call somebody a sophist because it's not like someone's like, I am a sophist and I engage in sophistry all the time, right? Us included at some point in our lives, right? Sure. Engage in sophistry. I'm defining sophistry specifically by saying someone who engages in sophistry is pretending to be on the rational circuit when in reality they're on the emotional circuit for the purposes of dominating you without having any of the risk of you retaliating, because hopefully you either A, don't know what's going on, or B, there's the peer pressure where if you fight back, everyone's going to blame you for starting it.
Mm-hmm. And it's not just interpersonally, and I don't know if you're going in this direction, but these are the same dynamics we see in the media, and we saw during the COVID time.
But before we get there, I do want to get there. Like
yeah.
this, like let's start with the interpersonal, because this is where the kung fu happens, right? And then suddenly you're already going there. This really expands. So, I was talking about after I came back from my trip, and then I realized I needed to tell that story of when the light bulb went off, right? So now I come back, I'm getting this manipulative crap from my family. I've already figured out how to identify this stuff, and I've already figured out the peer pressure thing, right? I was getting in people's faces. I was putting up with none of it. And what I found out, this was fascinating to me. Still, when I look back, it's fascinating to me. There were two types of people, how this reacted to. People that for no reason whatsoever would change. Now, they might stop in that moment, but as soon as they felt an opening, bam, they were back doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. Versus people that took a step back and went, well, wait a minute, I need to reconsider how I'm interacting with this person. Mm-hmm. Guess who I still talk to, and guess who I don't talk to anymore.
Yeah.
And I want to emphasize, okay, how you're already starting to see the practical implications of this, but keeping it in a personal level.
Yes.
Do you remember in 2016 during the Trump election where everybody lost their friends?
Oh yeah,
because
sure.
You know how many friends I lost?
Zero. Not that many, because you
zero, because I'd already gotten rid of them.
Yes.
I had already figured out how to identify manipulative people, and I just got rid of them. So when this 2016 thing came around and I decided I was going to be a Trump supporter, there was nobody. I mean, I got flack from people, but nobody I considered my friend.
Yeah, right.
Right. So this is and once you do this, what becomes fascinating is you're being pushed and pulled by all these people who want to manipulate you. And when you're able to remove that, suddenly it's like, I have some level of freedom that I didn't even know existed. I wasn't even aware, because these people had programmed me that I didn't even think this way. So in terms of how I identify this and how I deal with this, I have three parts that I break this down into. The first part is a more elongated explanation on the differentiation between these circuits. I posit that there's actually four. The two that we're really concerned about are the two that I mentioned, but I think it's good to draw the whole picture. Yeah. The second is, where exactly is the line between rational discourse and emotional domination and submission? Mm-hmm. And this is really where you need the formal logic to understand it. Then, where I think the meat is really on the bones for what I have to offer here, is how do we speed up identification? Because formal fallacies, while they're great and they're comprehensive, they will never fail you. You might not have enough time to go through it in your head. Mm-hmm. I have
to learn the hard way.
I mean, like, okay, was that a poisoned well fallacy? Was that a straw man fallacy? But I mean, by that time, the guy's running circles around you, and you've got an audience that's already thinking that you're an idiot, and so on and so forth. The third part is, if I tell you the name of it, then I have to explain more of it in depth. I won't do that. But The third part is, here are core concepts. There are 5 core concepts that I've identified that it's not comprehensive. There's some things that you won't be able to identify this, but it's kind of like an 80-20 rule. Knowing 20% of the rules allow you to play 80% of the game. This will catch so much by understanding these concepts. And if you understand these concepts, if you see somebody attempting to make an argument against one of these concepts, you don't have to find the fallacy. You already know one happened. Mm-hmm. We were getting into this into the last conversation before we got cut off from the time limit. But we were talking about, for example, there's the philosophical concept of is there such a thing as objective reality, right?
Yeah.
And so on one side of philosophy says, yes, there is such a thing as objective reality. And the other side of philosophy says, no, everything's subjective. Now, the traditional philosophical way of addressing this would be something to the effect of, okay, because if you're trying to speak to me and convince me of something, there must be something objective that you're trying to convince me of. So your argument is self-defeating, which is a completely 100% sound rational circuit proof.
Mm-hmm.
But we already talked about the rational circuit, or the emotional circuit doesn't give a rip about the rational circuit, right? Okay, you proved it, so what? So a person could just completely ignore that and still attempt to manipulate you. And what I've found is that if somebody ever, this specific example, starts arguing to you from something about subjective reality, they're setting up to manipulate you. Or they're actively trying to manipulate you. You don't need to find the fallacy. Because fundamentally, people base their behavior on what they believe that they're responsible for. So if you're responsible for something, we intuitively understand that we should act based on that responsibility. I mentioned this last time when we got cut off. If my house is on fire and my kids are in the house, and I know that my kids are in a house on fire, do I have a responsibility to get them out of the house? It's self-evident, yes. Because I know I have that responsibility, I gotta go do it. If I didn't know, now it would be an incredibly tragic situation, but if I didn't know, I wouldn't have that responsibility. Although, I mean, you could go, at that point, you really got to start going back, why didn't you know? Right? Let's really make sure that you had a good reason for not knowing. But I think I get my point across, is that depending on what responsibility is going to affect what my actions are. Now, where this gets manipulative, if I can convince you that your responsibility or my responsibility is different from the objective reality that it is, and I think that we can argue that there is an objective reality to what you should be responsible for, or what you are responsible for. If I can get you to think otherwise, I can change what you do.
Yes.
Hey, I'm going to go over to your house and mess up your whole room, and if I can come up with some BS of why that's your fault that your room's messed up, now you got to clean it up, not me. You understand that you're responsible for it, so you clean it up.
Well, it's like the Huck Finn painting the fence. That scene. There, if you can convince the others of this bogus responsibility,
exactly, they will act on it. So that's what sophistry fundamentally is. Now, in terms of this objective reality, does it exist or doesn't it exist argument? Responsibility is a subcategory of reality. Of objective reality. So if there's no such thing as objective reality, consequently, there's no such thing as responsibility. So when somebody's setting that up, it usually comes, people think they're being sneaky from it. There's like this wind up that they get ready for it, because usually people don't just say, well, that's just your opinion, man. Like, we're trying to figure out who's responsible for what, and I lay out an argument of hey, your house is on fire and your kids are in it, so you're responsible for getting them out right now. And you come back and say, well, that's just your opinion, man. That is on its face stupid. That's not going to fool a audience, right? But people who do to try to attack objective reality in order to set up a manipulative situation, it starts off something like, in the course of history, this has been a subject that has been debated a lot, and for going back thousands of years, there have been people on the side that you've been arguing, and also for thousands of years, there have been people on the other side of what's been argued of that argument, and it's gone back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So now, I mean, we're in the modern day, we're still arguing about it. So because of this, you can't say with any objective conclusion that what you're saying is actually true. That was just a long-winded way of saying that's your opinion, man. I mean, if we want to go back to formal logic, you didn't address anything that I said.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I don't know if that's technically a straw man or you'd call that one something else, but you didn't address what I said.
Mm-hmm.
I'm stating that as soon as you hear this thing coming that I'm going to deny objective reality, you can stop listening. You can understand that we're now in a win-lose situation. And
we're not on that rational circuit anymore.
Yeah, well, even if I'm trying to be, I'm not, right? We've left the rational circuit. And that what I've typically found, and I want to put a caveat on this. When I'm talking about sophistry, this is different from narcissism.
Yes.
Whatever strategy I talk about on here, do not try it on a narcissist. It's a completely different animal. So, someone who has narcissistic behavior, it doesn't matter if you do what I'm about to recommend. They will be 7 chess moves ahead of you, right? You have to take a completely different strategy with them. But what I found with what we'll call your low grade sophist or sophistry engager is that they don't want to fight. The reason they engaged in sophistry to begin with is because they don't want you to hit back. So if you simply say, look, I understand we're having a fight and I'm prepared to fight you. I mean, even if you say it in that terminology, oh man, they got somewhere else to be right now. They are gone, right? I mean, take the guy at my table for an example. Once I bared my teeth, it's like, oh shit, sorry, I don't want to swear the show. Man, I didn't sign up for this. I'm out of here. Right? Yep. If he had the gusto, the gumption to just dominate me openly, he'd just be like, "Hey man, I don't like your shirt. You're an idiot," in front of everybody. Why hide it? So this is a long-winded explanation of the 3 pieces. This third piece is identifying these core issues. So when you hear somebody starting to break one of these core issues, and these are philosophical issues. I try to talk about it without using the term philosophy because it's not necessary. And when you start talking about philosophy, 90% of the population, 99% of the population immediately falls asleep. So I think if I can navigate without talking about that, it's better. There's these core issues within philosophy where I argue objective reality is philosophy. Subjective reality is sophistry. And let's go to where you were going outside of the interpersonal relationships.
Sure.
If both sides are presented as philosophy, you're muddying the waters to the point where a person can't identify what I'm talking about. So if we have an educational system, for example, that teaches these things as equally valid, or even the subjective is more valid than the objective, first you're creating a race of dorky, low-level sophists. But second, you're creating a generation of people or a swath of people who are easily manipulated.
Yes. Oh, yes. And part of that, too, is the rise, I would say, since the 80s in these United States, and I suppose in the world, of the consumer. This concept of the consumer, which has replaced that of other ways of people seeing, and the consumer is one who is meant to be served. He has no responsibility, and you see that in education as soon as anything else, and it grows. It grew, spilled over a long time ago from retail, and you see these expectations, and it all just saps responsibility in one's life and one's participation in the community.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because responsibility, I'm not going to say it's equal to, but it's almost equal to power. Because responsibility is actually another word for free will. Look at the word, your ability to respond. Well, what the heck is that? That's your free will, right? Your free will is also your power, right? And I mean, let's slice this at any level. Let's slice this financially. Let's slice this politically. Let's slice this religiously. Let's say I'm a religious leader or a political leader or someone who's very rich. My free will has been expanded because I have greater influence because of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I take those things away, my free will has shrunk because, if I've got $10 billion or $100 billion, I could buy Twitter. Right? And then I could change the course of human conversation because, Elon Musk, obviously, who we're referring to, he can, he had the power to do that through money.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a free will choice. So responsibility, free will, and power are all very intertwined.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And if I can continue to sap away your responsibility, you're responsible for nothing, you're responsible for nothing, you're responsible for nothing, I'm sapping away your free will, which means I'm sapping away your power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I guess fundamentally, if I want to talk about intellectual self-defense, is I want to make people more powerful.
And I remember, I'll give you an interpersonal example, kind of spilling out into business, we'll say. Years ago, probably up on 10 years ago, Dylan, I had, long story short, I had to get emissions testing on the car. We have this thing in Connecticut.
Oh, yeah. We used to have that here. It finally ended here, but yes, I know what you're talking about.
The big shots in Hartford they need more cocaine and hookers, so they have all these little piddling taxes and everything, which is interesting because Connecticut makes a lot of the war chest, a lot of these bombs and things. But apparently my car is concerning. Anyhow, I had to get the thing, and so the police wouldn't harass me. And I took it to this mechanic in town who's quite infamous for being kind of a shyster, but I didn't know that. Uh-huh. And so here the son of a gun is telling me, because I had the check engine light on, telling me, we need to redo all the wiring in the car. We need to do this and that and the other. And then I don't have money for this. I was a dishwasher and a very poor teacher then. Now I'm just a poor teacher. But the point is, I said, there is no way I can afford this. And so
$4,000 later or something like that. Yeah,
exactly. So I said, okay, fine. This is an obligation on me. And I went on the DMV website and I found out that there were like plan Bs, and they could have a second opinion from Hartford would come down and second guess the mechanic and all this jazz.
Yeah.
The point is, it's like the light bulb you talk about with that guy in Europe. For me, this was like this pivotal realization when I mentioned that I'm going to take advantage of this mercy from the DMV, that they would have this allowance for people who didn't have money to have a second guy take a look at it. Mm-hmm. This mechanic, again, face changed. He was a Greek dude, and he had a little chit chat with the wife there. And then, like, his demeanor completely changed. He reset the battery, took off the positive cable, wait 15 minutes, reset the whole thing, said, go down, it resets the computer, check engine light's gone. But the point is, it's like a mystery movie.
Well, you threatened him with the law, is what you did.
In the most minor way. And the whole thing just crumbled, and it was he pressed a button and it was done.
Mm-hmm.
But it's power.
Yeah, it's power. And when I say you threaten him with the law, I want to emphasize you were actually threatening him on the physical level at some level, right? Because I mean, fundamentally, that's what the law is. If he gets messed in with the law, he can get fines, he can get his license revoked, he can get whatever. And if he ignores them, at some point at the end of the day, a sheriff comes with a gun to take his property or to close him down or evict him or whatever, right? So, you drop the circuit, I like to say. And then suddenly, this guy's not just sitting there, thinking we're having a rational conversation and not defending himself. Crap.
Yeah. The light bulb, or it's like a mystery movie. You pull the lever. Once you have that self-defense and you realize, and it is that ability to respond. Exactly what you're saying.
Yes. And then I always have like three things going through my head at once. And eventually I'll wrap it back around, but I think sometimes people think I'm like getting sidetracked. I am remembering where I came from, right? Yeah. So going back to what I was saying about I think are the two most important points of intellectual self-defense. The first is identification, which the three core subjects that I talked about are all geared around identification. Mm-hmm. And identification is very formulaic. I just explained it to you in kind of a formula of what it's like. But when you come to actually doing the self-defense, it's a different animal. It really requires hands-on. I mean, I could talk about a couple principles. Like I said, just stop being reasonable is number one. But when do you walk away? When do you engage? When do you get openly hostile? When do you get kind of submersive? When do you kind of throw their stuff back in their face? When do you do all this sort of stuff?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on one level, there's kind of this point of you can have your own style, and one style isn't necessarily better than the other. I mean, think of like a MMA, right? People from different styles are coming in all the time, testing, which style of martial art is going to work against what other style of martial art. And I mean, we could have an argument till we're blue in the face of which one's the best, but they all work at some level, right? How good are you at working your particular style?
Mm-hmm.
And again, with the martial art thing, I can give you ideas in a book or in a video or a podcast or something, but it's really something that you yourself have to try out. And I will say, if you are the type of person who gets more reasonable the more you get into a non-reasonable interaction. Mm-hmm. I call this the chess dilemma.
Yes.
Is that chess is very, very analogous to the formal rules of logic. In chess, you have a specific board with specific pieces, with specific rules, and a specific way to win the game.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't follow those rules, are you playing chess? No, you're doing something else.
Yes.
Right? It's something that's not chess. Similar to formal rules of logic, there's specific rules, a specific way to set things up, and a specific way to engage in discourse that keeps us on those formal rules. Mm-hmm. And if you stop doing those formal rules, you're not doing rational discourse anymore. You're doing something else. Now, I'm arguing you're fighting, right? So similarly, if we're playing chess and I start making moves up on you, start moving my knight 3-1 one direction or one the other, or moving my pawn across the board, or just putting pieces that were taken off and back on the board or whatever, and you respond by going, whoa, I better really think about this and play my best chess game.
You're doing two different things.
They're two different things, and you're losing at the game which is actually being played. And that game is I'm making up the rules, and you're not.
Mm-hmm.
What most people do who are smart, they continue playing chess.
Yep.
And I'm saying stop that. Stop being reasonable. First step of intellectual self-defense, identify. Once you identified, stop being reasonable. With a caveat, if you're in a dangerous situation, pretend. Right, fine. Now, another thing I want to say, this is also super important, because now we're kind of getting into human nature, right? It's going back to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
If the audience doesn't understand what's going on, they blame you for starting the fight once you defend yourself. The way I've interpreted that is that because they don't have the rational circuit fully developed, or I mean, that's not the right way to say it. They don't recognize what is and what isn't rational circuit. Mm-hmm. They're going to follow the nearest alpha.
Ah, yes.
So if you become the nearest alpha, it doesn't matter what the rational thing was. Mm-hmm. So in the event of, okay, somebody is engaging in sophistry, you challenge them, they scurry away like a cockroach, you turn around and everybody starts pointing the finger at you. If you turn around and if you engage with them and say, okay, I will take on all of you at the same time if I need to. You know what they typically do?
Sorry, man.
You just became the nearest alpha.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at, like, for example, you brought up the media, or if we bring in like the Shakespearean nature of politics, that's all it is, right? Rational discourse is, I mean, to call it secondary is probably giving it too much credit, right? Mm-hmm. And and particularly the media. I think I'm pretty good at intellectual self-defense. I don't know if I would handle well in the way that the media has refined their sophistry. It's unreal, because they got this whole thing. You've got 30 seconds to 3 minutes to have a in-depth conversation on the foundations of the universe, right? And first of all, if you can't get it across in those 3 minutes, you clearly don't know what you're talking about. Furthermore, they put you on there and they immediately frame you with a question where both sides are bad. So how come you stopped hitting your wife? Right?
Yep.
And so on the fly, you got to figure out something clever to get back at them. You can't lose your cool. You can't get mad, or you can't show that you're getting mad.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost every single. They've got it where every single out is bad for you, and then they have the power of they could just sit there and follow up and talk to you, talk about you forever, and you can't respond. I mean, it's changed now with the internet and stuff, right? But that's the battle. And people like Donald Trump and Carrie Lake, I think, are the ones that have really mastered how to battle that.
Yes, I remember, and I'm sure I'm not the only one with this memory of Mr. Trump, where this had been like late October 2016, and actually no, it would have been during the primary season because there were some other yos at it, and he had said like Rosie O'Donnell is a
I was just thinking about that one. Go finish it. It was exactly the example I was thinking of. Yeah.
And the media reacted as they always did to these sorts of things. And they're sitting there waiting for their watch for the apology from the Trump campaign. And he comes back. You're damn right. She got 10 chins. I said last time she had 5 chins. You got 10 chins or whatever. I forget.
Right.
But he stood up to her. That's the point.
Yes.
And they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do.
And I guess I wasn't thinking of the same example. I was thinking of the one where he the media calls him out for because he's mean to women or something, and he goes, only Rosie O'Donnell. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know how. I don't at this point in time, I don't think I would handle very well if I got stuck in the news media thing, because my strategy is typically to get a little aggressive in your face. Mm-hmm. They got that strategy covered. They know exactly what to do. Yes. What to do with that. They just make you look stupid and make you look bad. Find this little clip of you. If we take second 37 to second 42, he looks completely unhinged. We'll just play that over and over again until the end of time. Right. So that's the Western media has really, really, I think, perfected the framing on how to commit sophistry. Basically, I'm of the opinion that just to use the Trump example, but you can apply it to a lot of what they call the deplorables, shall we say. Mm-hmm. I believe in 2015, 2016, that the powers that be, they had this whole idea of misinformation, disinformation in their universities and things. They were working on unleashing that because as a way of they prepare it and then they unleash it, right? Yeah, yeah,
and then as a way of defanging their opposition. And I think part of their fury against Trump is that he beat them to it. He beat them.
Fake news. Like,
guys are fake news.
That was the word that came out that they were getting ready for, and he just owned it and threw it back at him.
Yes, exactly. And I think that pissed them off to no end.
Yeah. No, in fact, I mean, we're kind of diving into a different conversation here, but I'll just allude to this, is that I think that's one of the main weapons of self-defense that we have, not necessarily in terms of intellectual self-defense, but in terms of societal defense of, okay, the way that our Illuminati overlords they conquer through words, through controlling words, right? And if we can get ahead of that and take the words from them before they can get it, it totally messes up their game. Let me give an example. If I say the word stakeholder, who's the first person that comes to your mind?
Mr. Schwab, I should.
Klaus Schwab, right? Stakeholder's the big word now. And
it's so warm and fuzzy and inclusive.
Yeah, well, and then what it really means is owner. That's how they're using it as owner. Who's the owner here? Yeah. So, and then when you see that word stakeholder, you'll start to focus on it. You'll start to see it everywhere in government. Who are the stakeholders? Mm-hmm. Who are the stakeholders? We're doing this for the stakeholders. We're doing this for the stakeholders. Well, who are the stakeholders? So instead of battling the word stakeholder, it's too late.
Yeah.
We need to become the stakeholders. Specifically, here's the one I have in mind. Who is the stakeholder in a child's upbringing? I'm asking you.
Ideally the parents, unless the
state writes the law that says it's the state, which is
exactly right.
The case in every single state. They have their own way of doing it. It's the case in every single state. The argument from we'll call them a pro-freedom group that I'm associated with, that they say the way to really defang this isn't about getting that word stakeholder erased everywhere. It's to say the parents are the primary stakeholders of the children's upbringing within the state law. If you can do that, it's like the Illuminati overlords, Klaus Schwab running into a brick wall. Like it just totally messes up the game plan. So I want to emphasize totally exactly what you're saying is this playing with words and conquering with words, because this part of the second point in my 3 points is looking at what exactly is a word and what does that word contain. It contains a phonetic symbol, which is subjective, and it contains an objective thing that the phonetic symbol is referring to. And part of the game that these guys play is keeping the same phonetic symbol but changing the objective thing behind it. For example, what is racism? Racism used to be, okay, you don't like someone because of the color of their skin or their ethnic background or something. Now racism is people who are oppressed by people of privilege, and people of privilege by definition are white people. Right. So we have a conversation with a leftist. We're both talking about racism. We're talking about completely different things, but we don't know it. Right. Yeah. That's the island hopping word game that they play. So we're running up on time here. I want to see if I can get this in real quick. So yes, again, broaching this from interpersonal to societal ideas, religious ideas, philosophical ideas. The third point in particular, the quick identification thing I talked about that talks about the philosophical principles, I posit that this will also help you identify what ideas are crap or not. Let me give an example. So one of the principles that I talk about is judgment. How do we judge actions? Do we judge actions by a person's intention? Do we judge actions by the means that were done? Or do we judge actions by the ends that were achieved through those actions? Now, I'm sure you and anybody listening to this already knows it's the means, right, in the middle. Yep. Per my description, there's no if we were to judge things by intention, everybody could just intend the responsibility away. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. Which, side note, I personally find this to be the most aggravating sophistry technique because it's lazy. This is like the armchair quarterback sophistry technique. I didn't mean it. Now, the ends, it's also not valid because you could accomplish all your responsibility away. Yeah, I tortured and beat you, but you ended up with a good job. I tortured and beat you as a kid, but you ended up with a good job and a good family. So see, I'm vindicated in what I did.
A boy named Sue.
Yeah, you could just accomplish all your responsibility away. So the only thing left is the means, right? So let's look at communism. One of the ideas behind communism is that the end justifies the means. We'll kill everybody in order to achieve utopia. Well, I'll just stop you right there. You've already set off the red flag that I know it's bullshit. Right? Or I don't know about your theological background or that of the listener. I'm going to criticize Calvinism. And you might say that I don't understand it fully. Fine. I'm going to criticize my understanding of Calvinism, which is the predestination part. So when it comes to free will, this is another one of the core concepts. Do we live in a universe of free will or do we live in a universe of determinism? Well, if it's extreme on one side, if we're at extreme determinism, there's no such thing as responsibility because nobody ever made a choice. I can't help it. It's just the way I am. Right? I'm sure you've heard that a lot. Well, this is just the way I talk. Sure. Yeah. Right? If you get upset. Well, and by the way, the proper response is, well, this is the way that I talk back. And suddenly that they could change. It's like magic, right? On the flip side, if we live in a 100% free will universe, I mean, this is similar to subjective reality, is nobody could actually do anything to anybody else. If I punch you in the nose and your nose bleeds, that's your fault because your reality is 100% subjective. So there's no such thing as free will over there either. Okay, so both sides of the spectrum are invalid. So if we go into the middle, the correct way to say it is that some things are deterministic, some things have free will, and in order for us to correctly identify responsibility, we have to correctly identify what was deterministic and what was free will. Right? I posit, and this may be my misunderstanding of Calvinism, just go with it if defending you as a Calvinist, right? With predestination, well, that removes the free will.
Yeah, sure.
right? If my choices don't affect my judgment, well, then, like, who could possibly be responsible for anything at that point?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah, I did all these horrible things, but I'm predestined to go to heaven, so I'm cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Or I'm predestined to go to hell, so why bother?
Yeah, it creates the apathy.
Yeah. Now, again, I'm sure somebody would you don't understand it, right? Fine, but just take the one-dimensional thing that I gave you and analyze it with the tool that I just gave you, and then you can see, okay, that one-dimensional thing is invalid because it puts us in a situation where there's no responsibility for anybody, which means the person trying to tell it to me must be manipulating me. I can't assume anything else. And you can say, well, what if he's not actually wanting to manipulate you? Yeah, we just talked about intention. He's still doing it. And furthermore, even if, like, you can imagine someone who actually believes what they're saying, they're still manipulating you, because if you turn around and you believe it, now go back to responsibility, free will, power, you're lowering your own power. By letting that in, you're lowering your own power, so it's still manipulative. So I think it's... Yeah, sorry, I'll throw this back to you. We're getting to time. I think what I've developed is very useful. It's speedy, and it's incredibly practical, from the interpersonal relations all the way up to philosophical, religious, whatever ideas. And it's vital to being able to navigate in the world we live in. You're just a pawn if people could just manipulate you, and you have no defense against it.
Good, Dylan. Thank you for that. That's a good place to leave it. And I think we'll be seeing a bit of you on this channel down the line. So I think we can pick up on this point in the future. But golly, we're going to need that counsel, because the next 10 years, I think, are going to be real heady. Some of these weirdos have some crazy plans, and we have to keep our head about us logically, but also know how to defend ourselves.
Absolutely.
And, the links will be down below, but would you tell us, especially if people listen to this driving around or whatever, your websites, any projects you have coming up, and this sort of thing?
So our main website is irida.tv. That's IRIDA.tv. You can find all our stuff there. We're on YouTube. We were banned at one point. I was able to get it back. Check us on YouTube. We're on Rumble, BitChute, all those things. And yeah, I mean, support us by listening to us and share. We're one of the few places that don't beg for money. Please send us donations so we can eat tonight. We don't do that. If you really want to support us, just share and interact and subscribe, argue with us. We like fighting. We're not afraid of it.
But don't do it narcissistically. You got a black eye coming, I think.
Let's talk about that on another show. That's it.
Very good.
How to deal with narcissists is a completely different conversation from what I just talked about. Yes.
I look forward to having that conversation, Dylan. Thank you so much for your time. And to the audience, thank you for your time and attention there.
Well, thanks for having me on, John.